We shall now proceed with our thematic discussion on the human rights of women and girls of African descent. It's a privilege for me to welcome Ms. Gaynor Curry, the Vice Chair of the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, who will moderate the panel discussion. I also wish to welcome our distinguished panelists. Ms. June Suma, who's a member of the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. Ms. Diane Keita, Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of the Program of the United Nations Population Fund. And Dr. Satang Nabaneh, Director of Programs and Research Professor of Law at the University of Dayton Human Rights Center. I now invite
to Ms. Satang Nabaneh. You are an award-winning Gambian legal scholar and human rights practitioner with a deep commitment to advancing women's rights. Can you please tell us about the importance and the ways to empower, the importance of and ways to empower women and girls of African descent to become agents of transformative change? I want you also to speak to the issue of transformative leadership across sectors. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, friends, and Honorable Chair of the Permanent Forum. Thank you for having me. It is indeed an honor to be part of this panel. As you said, I come into this space as an African feminist legal scholar, no ifs, no buts. And my work at the intersection of education, research, and advocacy is also very central to this idea in relation to your question around empowering the next generation of female leaders. Part of the work that I have done is co-founding Think Young Women, a young women's organization based in the Gambia, works regionally, really focused around, as I said, fostering leadership, especially transformative leadership and young people, particularly women and girls, African women and girls, and communities of African descent, really taking the lead and the charge as it relates to issues that affect them. And so I think I wanted to start with, and the context have already been set, right, to recognize that we gather here at a time when women and girls of African descent across the world are navigating unprecedented challenges, right, whether that's rising nationalism, war, conflict, populist opposition, that threatens our hard-earned gains as it relates to women's rights generally. And also recognizing, as already been said, the context said, that the struggles that we face today as women and girls of African descent are not new, right? They're really built upon centuries of discrimination, exclusion, and violence. And so as we also think about the contemporary challenges that we face, whether that's voter suppression, economic inequality, state-sanctioned violence, as well as others, is also recognizing that these are interconnected issues. They are not siloed. They are part of a broader architecture of oppression that we know that disproportionately impacts Black women and girls. And so I wanted to approach the two-part question in 5 minutes, which is quite short, but I'll attempt to do so in two ways. One is to spotlight part of the research that we've been recently conducting, really that showcases the shortcomings as it relates to women's leadership, whether that's in politics, as well as in other areas, particularly looking at the concluding observations that have been issued by 4 treaty monitoring bodies, specifically CERD, CEDAW, the Human Rights Committee, as well as the Committee on Migrant Rights. I also wanted to, and I'll take this opportunity because as perhaps one of the youngest people on the panel, to also spotlight that the work that we did, looking at over 600 concluding observations, over 1,000 documents, was actually led by our 3 student female researchers who are in the room with us. Greatly appreciate the incredible work that was done as well. I think part of what comes out of the research work that we did is that the data unequivocally tells a clear story, right? Whilst there have been progress, obviously, as it relates to transformative leadership, in the past decade, it has been insufficient. And I think that is the key takeaway, partly as well, in relation to why we're having this panel as well. Too often, and you're all not strangers to this, we know that women and girls of African descent remain invisible, especially within international human rights mechanisms, but also in relation to leadership roles that they take as well. A good example is the data that we came up with, right? In terms of the fact that out of the 596 concluding observations, only 72 explicitly addressed the issue of women and girls of African descent. This means that the invisibility that we see must be urgently addressed and rectified, particularly in the second decade. But what we also know is, especially as we look at transformative leadership, as we look at women's leadership, is that the barriers that they face, especially as it relates to both participation and representation in decision-making bodies, also obviously intersect with, particularly as we look at other barriers, whether those are education, especially in reproductive rights, as earlier highlighted by the speaker, as well as others, especially in relation to just the idea around the protection of basic human rights. I come from the Gambia, a very small country in West Africa, but also where, when we think about women's participation and representation, it is usually taking one step forward and two steps back, which is very reflective of so many of our countries today. But we also see pockets of progress, and I do want to say, because I think this is a historical win, we recently saw the inauguration of the first female president in Namibia, the inauguration of the first female vice president of Namibia, as well as the first speaker of Namibia, as well as more than 50% of the cabinet being female leaders, right? Thank you. I think this historical win is a defining moment. I think as member states and countries that there needs to be political will as it relates to empowering women and girls of African descent to take leadership, to take the path forward, especially as it relates to both representation as well as participation. And just quickly, just to draw my conclusion, I do want to offer two recommendations to the Permanent Forum based on the recent work that we've done. One is to strongly urge the Permanent Forum to recommend to all UN treaty monitoring bodies that they should systematically apply a robust intersectional lens in all of their analysis of state reports before, during, as well as after the review of those reports. But particularly, and to re-echo this, we've had this over the course of the past couple of days, that treaty bodies should also urge states to collect data and report on comprehensive disaggregated data as well, particularly in ensuring that we're able to recognize women and girls of African descent as an important category, especially in terms of gaining an understanding of a more accurate context of their experiences as well. The second one is recognizing the critical role of women's leadership in advancing their own rights. We also call on, given the fact that we have member states here, to actively engage and provide meaningful support to civil society organizations that are particularly led by women and girls of African descent globally. Moreover, we urge the UN, given that we do have Madam Keta in our panel, as well as field officers, to develop and support initiatives that promote the leadership and participation of women and girls of African descent as well. To conclude, I think part of what we see, especially in the broader backlash against gender equality and human rights, has manifested in a clear rejection of intersectionality, coupled with the resistance to the pursuit of racial and gender justice. We need to recognize that tokenistic approaches to intersectionality are obviously prevalent among so many actors, often using the term as a cover for their reluctance to engage in the transformative work that requires authentic intersectional efforts that are typically required. And so ultimately, the second decade for people of African descent must be defined by bold and unwavering commitment to dismantling not only systemic challenges and inequalities, but also ensuring that we center an intersectional and gender justice in all of our efforts. The leadership and the experiences of women and girls of African descent must be at the forefront of our agenda. To paraphrase, our freedom is sweet. It will be sweeter when we are all free, and this includes women and girls of African descent. Again, many thanks for having me. I want to make just quick observations based on some of my own interventions, but to Reiko as well. To the Vice Chair of CERT as well, to reiterate that we did highlight, as you rightly said, the observations, especially in this report that we just launched earlier today. And the next phase of the research project is to engage directly with the treaty monitoring bodies, and we look forward to collaborating with you. I also wanted to, because the Gambia was mentioned and female genital mutilation was mentioned, part of the work that I do, yes, you're right in terms of observation of the practice, but also that the Gambia has been the first country that attempted to legalize or decriminalize FGM. Fortunately, in 2024, the National Assembly did not end up passing that bill, so that means that FGM in the Gambia is still criminalized. However, there is an ongoing Supreme Court case in which the applicants are arguing that the criminalization of FGM does violate their fundamental right to culture. So we'll see how it goes, but I think part of what it shows is that it is a call for countries to be vigilant, and it is a call so that, in essence, to really address the potential ripple effect of what we have seen in the Gambia, especially around the politics of criminalization. Just a plug as well to say that globally we see more than 60 countries criminalizing or having laws that prohibit FGM, including more than 25 in various African countries. Obviously, we see the practice continuing. However, and to say as well, that is part of the interest, and recently a plug on an edited volume that just came out on Monday on FGM in Africa, the politics of criminalization, really looking at, especially in terms of how to ensure there is more consolidated efforts as it relates to this. And part of that call as well, connecting it back to Professor Hansford's call to look at the Maputo Protocol as well as a blueprint, especially as we look at both international as well as regional documents in relation to the protection and the full realization of the rights of women and girls of African descent. I thank you.